Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA, and glad to be with you, as we said, on a Tuesday or a Monday morning, by the way. Y'all done with your Christmas shopping? Y'all ready to go for Christmas? You know, it's what is it, Brian? 2 days till men's Christmas shopping season starts. That's Christmas Eve. I know, it's an old, cheap joke. I'm sorry. But anyway. Great to have you here on the Gary Sutton Show. We meet up next with Kevin Mellott, who is an international security expert. He's been on our show before. And North Korea had a cyber invasion of Sony, big time. Apparently, Sony had made a film that had Kim Jong-un, their illustrious leader, killed in the film. And apparently, to get even, North Korea decided to do the cyber attack on Sony. And a lot of people are questioning, well, if you could do a cyber attack on Sony, why couldn't you do it on, I don't know, the United States government? Would that be a possibility? We're going to ask that question this morning and many more of Kevin Mellott, international security expert, who's with us here on the Gary Sutton Show. Good morning, Kevin. How are you?
I'm good, Gary. How are you?
Good, and always good to have you on the show. Thanks for getting back with us. A lot of people have watched this Sony thing, haven't really understood much until over the weekend. A lot of people started saying this is a new kind of cyber warfare. Of course, the president came out and said it's not that at all. It's simply a cyber attack, whatever the difference meant. He said it was an act of cyber vandalism instead of an act of war. You're deep into this industry. What is this? How should we characterize this as Americans right now?
Well, it's a series of federal and state crimes that were carried out against the Sony organization. They're not vandalism. I think that's way, way trivializing the situation. I mean, talking hundreds of millions of dollars of loss, and there's not too many vandalism incidents that result in that kind of damage. The second point is that in the criminal aspect, besides state and federal charges for cyber crimes and extortion and terroristic threats and all that jazz, you then have them trying to suppress civil rights. And no one's really jumping on this, but the First Amendment guarantees freedom of speech, but it also guarantees freedom to assemble. And when you threaten to blow anybody up who assembles at a location, you've got a secondary threat against the First Amendment. So you've got a group of different criminal charges and, of course, the civil rights charge on the First Amendment. So that's the number one thing. And the kind of funny part about this is we've dealt with things like this before. We just haven't dealt with it coming in this particular sequence. But I kind of am sitting there looking at the administration going, how can you not know what the charges are? We've already charged 5 top Chinese military leaders with these kind of crimes and have warrants out. And actually, those warrants were issued out of the Pittsburgh region. And the fact is, we know what's going on. We know who's doing it. And we know what the crimes are. So it's kind of a strange scenario, the way everybody's playing like they're not really sure what's going on.
You know what was really ironic on this? I thought about Benghazi for a second. And remember, the only person put in jail over Benghazi was the guy who produced the film. And, of course, the president and Hillary Clinton and so many others came out and blamed the filmmaker for stirring up riots, including one in Benghazi that never took place. And yet, at the same time, the president comes out over the weekend and basically doesn't get mad at them about making this picture, said they should be able to go ahead and make this picture, even though, obviously, it stirred up the North Koreans to want to do some cyber attacks here. Do you find any irony in that at all?
Well, there's a lot of hypocrisy, but Benghazi...
Better word, yeah.
They were covering what they were doing, and they were grasping at straws. They were looking for anything they could put out there. Touching on Benghazi for a second, the morning of the 12th, we sent photographs of the mortar fins that were used in Benghazi. We sent them out to certain groups in the government, and they were 82-millimeter mortar shells. That's a Russian unit. It takes 5 guys to fire it. We were very well aware it was a precision attack with military-trained individuals. So they knew the morning after the attack what really happened. They just didn't tell the public the truth. So that whole thing was packaged. But you're right. And of course, this is one of the things with the administration. They're so inept. They don't realize that what they say today will come back to haunt them tomorrow. And you're right. That one's going to haunt them on this whole deal. How do you determine what's free speech and when you want to lock somebody up?
Exactly. And, so when you look at this situation right now, I want to go a little deeper inside this because, you're an expert on this kind of stuff. And We're talking with Kevin Mellott, international security expert. So you go deeper in this kind of stuff. So North Korea kind of comes back and says, no, we didn't have anything to do with this. We'd like to find out a little bit more about, how you found out about it. And you kind of laughed when you told me this off the air last night. Take me inside that a little bit.
Well, yeah, the reason they want to help with the investigation is they want to know how we figured out that they did it. I mean, this is like, a guy commits a homicide saying to homicide detectives, why don't you let me help you on the investigation? Of course, you want to know what evidence they got and how they found out who did it. So, first of all, we don't need the North Koreans to give us help on this investigation. Second of all, they're the perpetrators, so they're not going to give us real help. And third of all, the real touchy part about this is, from what I've seen so far in the code analysis, it looks like they might have used some servers in China and routed some of the traffic through China. Well, the Chinese would have known about it, number one. Number two, you got to remember our president was just there making nice with them. If the Chinese have their fingers in this one, it's going to be nasty. And if the Chinese didn't realize what the North Koreans were doing going through their servers, the North Koreans could be in a lot of trouble with the Chinese.
When you look at this, are we getting to a point where we need to engage? Are we engaged in this kind of stuff right now? Do we need to engage in this kind of thing more against other countries? I mean, are we now in a situation where you could have a cyber warfare kind of thing? And more importantly, I mean, Sony was just one example. Can you get inside the United States government, or is it much harder to crack that?
Well, no, we've had guys get inside intelligence agencies, inside the Pentagon. We've had people crack into our systems, okay? Now, number one, keep in mind it's a constantly evolving science, if you will. Now, it's like, I always say, it's like getting a firm grip on Jell-O. You can touch it, but you can't squeeze it too hard. And so we're constantly coming up with new systems, new technology, new software, new ways of stopping, as well as the bad guys are constantly coming up with new ways of getting inside. But people have to understand that our adversaries, and like I said, now they're talking about having the Chinese help us, which is hysterical because we just issued those warrants in May for the 5 Chinese military officers that attacked the U.S. last year. So kind of stupid to ask the Chinese for help because we got warrants on their own guys. But the bottom line is that there are adversarial organizations and governments that have thousands and thousands of people trying to hack into systems. Well, in the capitalist system, where we pay people a real wage, you can't have thousands of people on staff to defend yourself. But in a communist system, where they're not paying them anything, they work for the government, you can have thousands of people trying to crack. So if there's a lot more people trying to get in than trying to stop them from getting in, they're going to get some successes.
It was interesting. The president that came out the other day and was talking about this, and I just wanted to get your reaction to these 2 paragraphs. And it kind of goes back to something we were talking about a moment ago with regard to how he looked at film on the Benghazi situation, how he looked at film now, and of course Sony involved here. He said, I was pretty sympathetic to the fact that Sony have got business considerations they've got to make. And, had they talked to me directly about the decision, I might have called the movie theater chains and distributors and asked them what the story was all about. A lot of the movie chains said, we don't want this movie now about Kim Jong-un being killed in it. But what I was laying out was a principle that I think this country was to abide by. We believe in free speech. Apparently not so much in that film producer who did the thing on that supposedly got somebody upset in the Middle East. We believe in the right of artistic expression and satire and things that powers might not like. And if we set a precedent in which a dictator in another country can disrupt through cyber, a company's distribution chain or its products, and as a consequence, we start censoring ourselves, that's a problem. And it's a problem not just for the entertainment industry, it's a problem for the news industry. Well, obviously, we censored ourselves by nailing that guy who made the film about Muhammad back in 2 years ago, and here the president is kind of talking again about not doing that kind of thing. So can you have it both ways?
No, you can't have it both ways, and I sit back and look at how he comes out with these comments. First of all, he's the president of the United States. He's not the CEO of any company, and he can have his opinion, but when he gets to the private sector, he can't make people do things. Okay, right. He can't make people air a movie or whatever. What he should have done.
Guess what? The people who are paying for Obamacare might disagree with you. He did.
Right. Well, what he should have done on this whole deal right from the start is he should have had the FBI secure 10 movie theaters, or at least make that offer to one of the major movie theater chains that we would put bomb-sniffing dogs air support, agents all around the movie theater so they can show that movie. You don't care if it's even 10 theaters in the whole country.
Right.
And if 100 people saw it, I don't care. The point is you go on and you show the thing. But they didn't reach out to Sony. Sony says they called, no one called them back. And I didn't hear about any of the regional offices of the Bureau putting their SWAT teams out to protect movie theaters for one night. Now, I'm not saying the government needs to be in that business, but when it comes to a First Amendment civil right violation, it wouldn't have hurt to do that just one night to prove the point that we're not going to have someone intimidate us from outside. The second point is the reality of North Korea blowing something up in the U.S. over a movie. The retaliation, if we had a government that could make decisions, the retaliation would be horrendous. So the whole thing is about who's the weak guys on the block. And I go back to several years ago to the apology tour. You run around the world and apologize and then act weak. Every idiot and his brother is going to take advantage of you. And we've seen this constantly. We saw it with Putin. It's still going on with him. We got it going on now with North Korea, which is the smallest player in the world on the bad guy side. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And now we're making a deal with Cuba, and we're rolling over for them, too. So there's a lot of background politics that set our country up for this kind of action, and it's not over.
You mentioned earlier, Kevin, that we know who's doing this. Who specifically is doing this within North Korea, or is it strictly the government's doing it, and we know that for sure?
Okay, so there's two possibilities. Most civilians don't know this, but there's actually what we call software as a service for criminals, where criminal entities will charge you a price to hack and attack a target for you. So if you're not smart enough to write your own code and so forth, there are groups you can hire that will do it for you. And then you have actual government elements. So the North Koreans have an actual unit inside their government that specializes in computer cyber attacks. So it could have been the North Korean unit that did it, the government employees, or it could have been a for-hire group that did it for them. But in both cases, we know it came out of North Korea. There's lines of code inside the nefarious code that was put in Sony's system, which are identical to the lines of code that were used to hit the South Korean banks last year. And we know that was a North Korean attack. And then the software that they put in the system is a software that's designed to call back home to download more code. Once it defeats the security aspects inside the system, it's infected. And it called back to North Korea. Okay? So we know that the North Koreans got their hands all over this. Whether it's their actual full-time employees that did it or contractors that they hired to do it for them, either way, they're still behind it. They funded it, and it came out of their country.
How do you react, just very quickly here before we take a break and we'll come back and finish this up, but how do you react when you're John McCain saying this is a cyber warfare? I don't know what we're supposed to do on that because it's not like we have good relations with North Korea as it is. No,
I don't. I disagree. It's not cyber warfare. It may demonstrate they have the ability to wage cyber warfare, but these are criminal acts. It's not terrorism, and it's not warfare. They're criminal acts. They violated the Computer Abuse Act. They've done extortion, terroristic threats. These are all federal criminal charges and state criminal charges, and they attack a private sector entity, not the government. Now, with that in mind, there are all sorts of criminal charges that they should be charged with. But the fact to me is it's not terrorism. They haven't killed any non-combatants, which is the true definition of terrorism, and they haven't attacked the government. What they are, though, is demonstrating how weak we are in stopping them. But that doesn't mean we don't have the capacity. It means we don't have the will and the decision-making at the top to shut it down, because we do have the capacity.
We're going to take a break. We're going to come right back here with Kevin Mellott, who is an international security expert, and talk more about this attack by North Korea on Sony. Could they do it to the United States? Could they get inside? Kevin said they already have done it. But what about when would it become cyber warfare? That's a big question. We'll ask Kevin when we come back right here on the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. Kevin Mellott, an international security expert, continues with us this morning. So at what point in time would this escalate to cyber warfare? Because that word is kind of thrown around with many people not even knowing what it means totally, Kevin. And I would assume that if loss of life were to take place or some kind of destruction to America were to take place in any way, shape, or form, that might constitute the definition?
Yeah, that's correct. And it's kind of interesting here. We've got a complete system for this. but I'm not sure everybody at the top is fully aware of it. Inside the FBI, they have a public-private outreach program called InfraGuard. I actually work with that group, and it's to bring the best of cybersecurity protection to the 16 critical infrastructure sectors of the United States. And those infrastructure sectors are like the chemical industry, the nuclear industry, food, water, power, healthcare, government facilities, first responders. So we've already categorized the 16 infrastructure categories that could be critical in causing loss of life, or severe injury, or total upheaval in the government ability to protect the public. So if they attack one of those sectors and you've got that threat against public safety, then you're into it. Now, interesting point, the media, as far as movie making, is not a critical infrastructure.
Absolutely, yeah.
And therefore it falls back on the private sector, it falls back on Sony to contain it. And I'll guarantee you, by the way, Gary, if they go down the road, I'll bet you 10-1, it was a Sony employee who violated their own security policies that allowed the virus into their system to begin with. We deal with this all the time. There was a survey done last year. It said 75% of the employees admitted they violated company security policies in the cyber field on a regular basis because they're inconvenient.
And not to sound too dumb, but how did they violate? I mean, what do you have to do? So people out there that work with companies and so forth that see if I see a strange email show up, I don't open it. It's one that I really looks odd to me, or I'll ask our IT guy about it. So if you're an employee at Sony, what did you do maybe to open this up to this virus from North Korea?
You open up an email you think it's from a friend of yours, but that friend's phone was penetrated because they went on a website that was not protected. That website hacked their phone, took all their email addresses. Now they send you an email, and it looks like it's coming from your buddy, and it says, hey, this is a great deal. You can make lots of money. Then you clip it open, and it downloads a virus without you even knowing it. The point is, everybody's got to knock it off with quick ways of making money, and that you've got some lost uncle that left you $2 million and all this crazy stuff. And then the second point is, there's got to be certain websites you do not go on with work-related equipment. And where we're getting in trouble now, Gary, is you may not go onto it with your desktop, but you do it with your phone at home, and then you come into work with your phone and log into the company network with your phone. And then it transmits that Trojan, that hidden code, into the system from your phone. So we've got a lot of education and a lot of policy enforcement to do, because basically the cyber capabilities right now, what people carry in their hands, is the same as letting a 2-year-old drive your brand new car.
Wow. Kevin Mellott, an international security expert, with us here this morning on the Gary Sutton Show. So do you see us now stepping up efforts, and maybe you be one of the guys to do it, of putting up new guards against this? And do you see us stepping up efforts to maybe go on the attack on countries like North Korea to maybe disrupt some of the things that they're doing?
Well, first of all, in the private sector, there's not enough people in the business. I work with 2 universities and a couple of colleges in their cyber programs, and we need people. We need a lot of people. There's a lot of jobs. And the private sector needs to put more people into this, because it's going to undermine their entire business operation if they don't start monitoring on a regular basis. There's no question in my mind in the Sony case that activity was going on for days without Sony probably aware of it. And if they had guys monitoring it with live, real-time monitoring tools, they probably would have stopped it a lot sooner. Now, on the government side, the government's got a pretty good program, but I recently was at a presentation, a private presentation with several top government leaders, and every one of them was asking for more cybersecurity specialists. So as a young person, if you're looking for a great career that pays well, cybersecurity is where you want to go.
And you're going to end up sitting down and watching an awful lot of stuff coming in and out and maybe processing it. Is that right?
Yeah, there's two different things. One is like what we do, which is field operations and figuring out how the bad guys operate and actually chasing them down. And then there are the code writers and the analysis guys that sit inside and watch it and design the protection systems. But, everybody keeps saying we need more firewall. A firewall doesn't help if your own employee goes on the web and downloads something through the firewall.
Let me ask you a real dumb question here to close, Kevin. Can you rig these things in such a way, you talk about a firewall, where you send a virus back if someone tries to attack you? Is there any of that kind of stuff going on? Any research in that area?
We have all sorts of capabilities, Gary. We can shut down a site. We can shut down the IPs. Look, here's the realistic thing. For Sony to receive the threats from the North Koreans, the North Korean threat had to come through a U.S. IP service provider that Sony uses. So you can block these addresses from foreign countries. You can do all sorts of stuff, and you can blacklist them so your system won't even go onto them. You can do a lot of technology. We just haven't jumped to it. And on an offensive level, our government does have the capability to send packages to these guys to cause serious damage to them.
That would be
top level.
That would be interesting if we ever decide to go on that attack. Kevin, Merry Christmas to you. Happy New Year. Thanks for taking the time this morning. You really enlightened us a lot, as you always do. And I'll look forward to talking to you again in the future. I have a feeling this might not be the last time we'll see something like this.
I'm sure we're going to see more, especially since the guys that did the threat got results. Kevin,
thanks so much, and take care, my friend.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you. Kevin Mellott with us, an international security expert. Boy, I'll tell you what, just found out some new stuff this morning. At least I did. I never heard about before. We're also going to find out about a local film producer put out a documentary over the weekend. His name is Shane Spiel. And what was it on? The York Steam Whistle.